All right. So today is Friday and it is Veterans Day, I believe. I think tomorrow is Armistice Day for World War One, but today I believe is Veterans Day. Or is it literally today, or are they having it celebrating on Monday? In any event, it's a day. And I hope y'all are having a good one. Today's topic is watch your mouth, why you should never use woke vocabulary. Now, it was brought to my attention by my dear friend Kieran White and founder of Woke Screen, which hosts this Discord and group, that there's an argument to be made for using the words that woke people have or woke ideology has stolen, appropriated, changed the meaning of whatever in their proper use so as to take them back. Uh, that is a point well taken. And that is also not what I'm here to talk about. So, just to make sure there's no confusion, what I am not saying is I'm not saying don't ever use the word racist, for example, in its proper form. Don't ever use the word, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of what colonize in its proper form. In fact, you could point at things that the woke do to colonize institutions and colonize even countries, that should be called out as such. That's the proper use of the word. That's not what I'm talking about. So now that I've gotten that out there and, agreed with Karen that you absolutely should assert proper use of language and terms, even if woke people are using them, just use them correctly. Make sure you're using the original and correct use of the term, not the bastardized version. What I'm here to talk about is more along the lines of what Naomi Wolf was talking about last week, in her podcast, about the woke, use of language, theft of language, quite literally. And that is, be careful you don't use not only specific words with the new meanings, but make sure you guard against using speech and writing habits that they use. So, examples. There is that word racist. If you're going to use it, if you're going to use terms like bigot and racist and so on, be very sure you're not just using it the same way they do, unless you're very clearly being sarcastic and ironic, okay? But what's good for the goose, good for the gander? No, don't do that. Use it accurately. If you suspect someone literally is a racist, then you call them that. It's not just an insult to be hurled around because somebody's being a jerk. Another one that I see people get sucked into a lot is, and I do too. Oh my God, it's driving me crazy how much I've been sucked into this trap of saying person of color, people of color. Oh, no. Black people. If you must. Okay. I don't even like African American because I'm not into the whole hyphenated thing. Most of the people I know who are not woke and who are black refer to themselves as black. So I think I'm on solid ground here. If anyone watching this disagrees, please send me a note. Not because you're like offended or whatever, but if you're just saying there's a preferred term, it's one thing to use the term because people say, well, I would prefer, but to me, people of color is like colored people. It's just the backwards version of colored people. And I won't do it. I will not. If I catch myself doing it, and I know I've done it recently, and I was like, that's why I say watch your mouth, because you'll be talking and you won't even realize it. It'll just pop out. It's sort of like being around people with a certain accent, and after a while, you spend enough time with them, and it's almost human nature. You start to copy their accent. I know it happens to me. I live in the South and I've already, I say y'all all the time. But if I'm speaking to someone with a really thick Southern accent and I'm speaking to them long enough, so more than 15, 20 minutes or so, I'll find myself doing this. That's messed up. It's not a purpose. I mean, I'm not sitting there consciously saying to myself, ooh, I want them to like me, so I'm going to mimic their speech pattern. Nope, just sort of happens. We've seen people who are American go live in the UK, Gwyneth Paltrow, and others, take on this affected speech where they have this weird continental or cross-Atlantic expat way of speaking that's not really an English accent. It's not really an American accent. It's something in between. And as much as we love to poke fun at them, it's kind of natural. It sort of happens. I'm sure if I spent long enough living there, I might start to say things like Kieran. I would hope I wouldn't, but I probably would. Most people do. At least you would start just like I say, y'all. You might start saying mate, or you might start saying, love or sis, or who knows what you might say. In any event, that's something we do. And I caution you because that is the goal. That is the goal. Because, as Naomi Wolf points out, if you start reflexively copying words in the woke usage and using them to replace words you previously used because that's how everybody's saying it now, almost like consulting jargon or office jargon, you become part of changing the language, and that in turn changes thoughts. So here's a really good example that she gives. And I do encourage you to listen to her, read her essay if you have not done already. Social. The word social, as in social distancing. How many of you ever thought of the concept of social distancing when you were sick in those words? You might have instinctively thought, well, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to keep my distance from other people because that's a considerate thing to do, I guess, or I'll stay home or whatever. I'm not going to go near people and sneeze all over them. But you probably didn't call it social distancing. You probably didn't call it anything. You just sort of did it and didn't want to think about it. And it was an individual choice you made based on your symptoms, based on your needs. I'm just running out to pick something up. I'm not going to get too close to people. I'm making the decision about how much I want to be out there. You probably didn't feel like you had either an obligation or, responsibility or anything to behave differently based on your own assessment. Terms like social distance imply very strongly that the society, that there's something called a society, there's a social group out there that has a claim on you and your comings and your goings and where you stand, where you're allowed to stand, how close you're allowed to stand, and so forth. And when they tell you to socially distance, social distance, social distance, it's not only telling you what you may and may not do according to some invisible group somewhere, but it invades your mindset into believing there is such a thing as that group out there. And there isn't. It doesn't exist. She talks about how society doesn't exist, and there's a big debate on, what do you mean society doesn't exist? Not like that. Not like that. It's an organic thing, millions of individuals or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands that happen to live in the same location. But there is no collective with one mind that has decreed what you may and may not say, what you may and may not do, where you may and may not go, except insofar as laws literally have been passed that are based on protecting rights, individual rights, not asserting group control. And there's a difference. And so when we use these words like social distance or social construct or social responsibility, social awareness, just social in front of everything, social justice, we are creating the perception of a society that has this authority. We are erasing, first eroding and then eventually erasing the thing that makes us unique as Americans in all the world, I believe. And that is the concept of individual liberty, individual rights, being sovereign, inalienable, and to be protected at all costs, from which all other rights derive. Like, if you don't have individual liberty, you got nothing. You've got nothing. You're literally dependent on others to not hurt you, to not take from you, to not in any way, encroach on your life. They technically start to own your life with the very first law that has social in front of it, or is justified with some concept that has social in front of it, like social distancing. And I think, as do many others, that this is intentional, this use of social in front of words, and just to describe our position on the planet, never mind in the country, as not having individual liberty. I believe that's the end goal. Once we can erase if we keep thinking about ourselves as just part of a collective, and we use these words, we lose the ability even to speak about ourselves as individuals, or we get to where we are right now, where I meet people who hear me say individual rights, individual liberty, individualism, and you can see on their face, they kind of like wince. Isn't that selfish? They're like uncomfortable. They're visibly uncomfortable with the term individualism, individuality, individual liberty, personal responsibility, individual responsibility. You can almost see the wheels turning in their minds as they're very quickly trying to figure out what to make of you. And we are already at a point where large numbers of people in America equate those terms that I just listed with extremism. It's what's enshrined in our Constitution. It's what our politicians swear to preserve, protect, and defend. And yet, are they really? When they use these words with social in front of them all the time. Not so sure. So, social is the big one. Probably the biggest. That you should be very careful. Do not use it under any circumstances. And then the flip side of that is, don't forget to use the words I just listed. Individualism, individuality, individual rights, individual liberty. Say them every chance you get. When you talk to people about who your candidates are, who you're voting for, how you're evaluating them, I certainly hope you're evaluating them based on their commitment to preserve, protect, and defend individual liberty, not the rights of Christians or the rights of the unborn or the rights of whatever other group. That's really not any different than the woke. We talk about trans rights or BIPOC rights or these other rights. Those rights don't exist. There either are individual liberties or there aren't. And we start giving groups of people some special right. How do we have an argument against them? We don't. We don't. Even to the extent that people want parental rights. Well, you have them. You have them by virtue of being individuals who produced and or took on the responsibility for those children. So you have rights. Namely, you have due process rights. You have all the rights associated with, to be, sort of safe in your person and your property and so forth. They cannot come and search. They cannot come and make demands of you or of your parenting without due process. And we keep forgetting. I was just having a conversation with somebody today about in loco parentis. People want to pass parental rights legislation to protect parental rights. I'm like, you act like you don't have them. You need to get them from government. You have them. Your child is a minor. They cannot consent. They're 100% dependent on you. So for all intents and purposes, they are your property. I know that sounds cold. It doesn't mean you can do anything you want to them. Your dog is also your property. You wouldn't abuse it, So it does, just because you own your home, it doesn't mean you get to burn it down, even if you own it outright. It's there are things that you can do with your property and things you can. And when it comes to people, they're not property in the sense of chattel. They're property in the sense that they are yours and you are responsible for their safekeeping, and you make the decisions. And unless and until somebody can demonstrate that you are violating their rights as people in America, they have individual liberty too. But you have due process as their parent. They can't just assume. And because they're minors, there's a limit to how much they can demand be done for them without your approval. Even when they say, my mom is abusive, you have a right to due process. You don't suddenly lose that right because a kid said so. And what's happening is government is using its authority as the school, the people running the schools. They're in loco parentis authority, which is temporary and supposed to be very, very limited. They've expanded it right before your eyes and nobody's questioned it. So instead of challenging in the definition of in loco parentis, which now apparently includes, we can literally parent your children, right down to giving them medication, taking them places to have surgeries like abortions. Instead of challenging that and saying, nope, pretty sure in loco parentis doesn't mean that. Pretty sure I didn't lose my due process rights. I didn't lose my existing rights as the proper legal guardian of that child. You didn't suddenly get power of attorney from me to be me in my absence. Didn't give you that. Don't know where you assume that I did. In fact, I'm compelled to deliver my child to you. It's not even voluntary. There is no contract between us, implied or explicit, that says, I give you this. That's why I keep telling parents, don't sign those forms that say, I've signed off to you can take care of my kid with all the buried in the fine print or expansions to the loco parentis. So now they say, I want, get parental rights from the government. What? You do that, you're going to permanently enshrine the notion that they give them to you, that you don't already have them. Another one with the social on it is the social emotional learning. I hear people all the time in, the so-called unwoke world using the terms social and emotional learning, thinking they can, use it and just use it, to refer to things without validating the concept. No, you can't. It currently is understood to be a program and a praxis and a philosophy all rolled into one. And so if you're going to sit and talk about it as a thing, as those, understand you're playing in their sandbox. If you mean character, say character. If you mean the social and emotional learning done by parents at home, then say so. That would be like what Kieran says, the appropriate use of the term. But don't talk about SEL as anything other than the poison that it is if you think it's poison. Don't start talking about, we need to have a better SEL program. We need to have an SEL program that isn't woke. It's like saying we need to have water that isn't wet. I guess ice, maybe. That'll be wet soon enough. So don't use their terms. Speech pattern wise, there's something else that they do. Naomi points it out. We've gotten to a point in America where people who are supposed to be accountable to us, she talks about politicians, I'm going to talk about school administrators and teachers, stonewall in ways they were never able to stonewall before because of tricks of language. So it's not just they don't return your emails. Of course they do that. But even when you're face to face with them or at a school board meeting, they'll say, we're not going to discuss that right now. We're done here. This conversation's over. We're done. We're not going to talk about that. What? That is a linguistic trick. Obviously, it sounds like what it is. It's stonewalling, and they're just cutting you off. They can't get away with that. You cannot allow them to do that, and so you should not do it. And it's another one. It's really hard to do. When people start, arguing, getting up in your face, whatever, if you don't want to continue the conversation, just don't continue the conversation. But if you repeat things like, we're done here, I'm done with this, we're not having this conversation, you're simply continuing to introduce into the world, into our language and our culture, the notion that I have the authority to shut you down and not answer your potentially legitimate questions. If you think someone's question is illegitimate, tell them, I don't think that's a legitimate question. Ask me a question that is legitimate and I'm happy to answer it. But own it. Explain why you're not going to answer or why you're done. So, for example, on social media, if somebody's just going off in some illogical tangent, to say, it doesn't sound like you're interested in a serious discussion about this. You're just insulting me at this point. I'm going to bow out. I'm out. Have a nice day. Whatever. But if you do they're talking smack and you just, we're done here. You're really no better than the White House press secretary. Even if they're the craziest loon in the world, you're repeating this kind of snarky, dismissive thing, and you are legitimizing it as a means of ending conversations you don't want to have. So other people will pick up on it. And it becomes like that accent, foreign accent that people keep using every time I'm in a conversation I don't want to have. It's perfectly legitimate for me to just say, we're done here. Now, of course, it's legitimate for you to stop having a conversation, but be mindful how you do it. It does matter. Then, of course, when they do it, they feel justified. Well, you do it too. So don't. Another one is, and I do this a lot, and I don't mean it this way at all, but I'm going to watch myself now. People on the woke side, the woke language, they'll make a point. You disagree with the point. And rather than address your disagreement or answer your questions, they'll say, again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they just repeat the point they just made. That addition of the word again in front of the repetition is very dismissive. I actually don't use it that way. I just repeat my own points when I'm making videos. Sometimes it's like a tick of my language. But I don't presume that I'm talking to someone who is disagreeing with me or challenging me. I'm just repeating myself. And I don't want people to think I forgot that I already said it. So I say again, and then I say it again. So, but it is a little bit of a tick, and I'm working on it because I don't want anyone to misconstrue that what I mean is, okay, dummies, you didn't hear it the first time. Let me tell it to you again. I'm not answering this other question. I'm just going to repeat what I just said to you. The current press secretary does it all the time. Again, repeat the answer that was the non-answer. And another one is to withhold information. School officials do this all the time. To withhold information, they'll say, well, what I can tell you, what I will tell you, what I'm going to tell you. That's not what you asked. What you asked was for the information you wanted, not for what they can do. Why can't they tell you more? So if you just let it go, or if you turn around and do it in return, well, what I can tell you, unless again, you're poking fun. Now, if you're poking fun at them and you make it clear, I'm being ironic here. Where are you taking little Jimmy that you need to have him out of school for a week? Well, what I can tell you is he won't be here. I mean, if you want to be funny and throw it back in their face, by all means. But if you start using that and you bring that into the language, we just continue to perpetuate this idea that it's perfectly okay to stonewall people who have a legitimate reason to ask us questions. And we are not going to answer them. Say you're not going to answer it and explain why. Say, I understand you want the answer to your specific question. I cannot give it to you because here are my reasons I'm not allowed. I don't want to give it to you because here are the reasons I don't want to give it to you. Or I don't have it because I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer. And I think there are times when that happens, and rather than say, I don't know, and reveal themselves to be either ignorant of something or whatever, to sound superior or to sound like I'm withholding and you shouldn't have asked me that question. That's the subtle message but underneath. Well, what I will say is you don't have the authority to have all that information, and I'm holding some of it back. So there you go. And we need to not do that, and we need to not let them get away with doing it. These are all ways that they're taking our language and twisting it. And of course, there are the woke words that I've explored in my show, or my shows rather, my different different woke words of wokeism shows. I do have a running list of words that I have yet to do, actually. And so just, be on the lookout for those. I'm trying to find where it is, but I think I have next up, I'm going to work on ways of knowing. But that's not one I think any of you are in danger of using. Just don't let it go by without, I'm going to need a ruling on the field here. What does that mean? Explain it to me like I'm 5. What does it mean? Ways of knowing. What is a way of knowing? How is it different from knowing versus not knowing? What is it to know something? What are the metaphysics you're using over here? What can be known? What is it? How do you know what you know? Please explain. I mean, we need to get better at holding people's feet to the fire when they use these kinds of terms and not let our language be hijacked. Now, if you're at work too, and you are pressured to use politically correct terms, pronouns, other ways of forcing you to use language, words like affirm, words like, trying to think of some good examples here of this sort of words, that restorative practices, restorative. Don't just use that word, restorative. They've co-opted the meaning, and it no longer means to fix something that was broken or restore it to its original condition. It's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about with restorative and restorative practices, restorative justice, just like with social, is to restore the power imbalance to where they believe it should be. They think everybody who has power currently has it illegitimately, unless, of course, they fit the right boxes to check. In other words, unless they're not white, not Western, and, ideally not successful. Okay. And definitely not conservative. So, if they're a Marxist, black or brown person who's Muslim and, screaming, yelling about being downtrodden, and also a woman and also, gay, if there's such a person, then that person is presumed to have had power taken from them, and anything restorative is to give it back. So when you use terms like restorative, their way, you're actually reinforcing the notion that there was a fixed pie of power, and if someone doesn't have it, that means someone else stole it from them. Same thing as you don't want to use the word colonizing correctly or decolonizing correctly. You can go ahead and use the terms with their correct meaning, but do not use them the woke way. Not without being crystal clear that you're being sarcastic. Another thing that people do a lot is they will use terms within the unwoke sort of fight. They'll use terms or acronyms that the woke use. So, for example, GC, gender critical. I know this term was coined probably by people who said, we're not TERFs, so we're not going to call ourselves that. Why do you need a new term? What, gender critical? Like, why are you validating that gender, the way they describe it, is something that we need to be responding to? How about just based? I live in reality. That's it. I live in reality. Now you might say, but Deb, does that mean I can't recognize trans adults and be respectful of them and their choices and stuff? Of course not. Why would that mean that? Why would that mean that? But if you're going to refer to children as trans kids, you're playing in their sandbox. If you're going to use terms like gender critical, and unironically, as if you're like, I don't want to say that I'm biologically accepting or whatever, then I don't know. Your opinion may differ, but I do not use that term. I do not like that term. I know there are people who use it all the time. They'll say GC, gender critical, etc. I don't care for it. I just talk about reality and biological sex and so on. Because again, I said again, I don't take issue with trans adults who transition as adults and they do that. It's their business. None of my business. It's fine. What? And I actually prefer to call them transsexual, which is what a lot of them call themselves, not transgender. I don't like to use the term gender at all, because every time you use the term gender, although it used to have a meaning, and if you want to use it in its absolute literal sense, like Kieran is saying, I mean, knock yourself out, but I prefer sex. What's their sex? Not what's their gender. The only exception there would be gender expression, because we do put something out to the world about what sex we are. And the way, there are like a million different ways to do that. I mean, you can't count how many different ways there are to do that. So if somebody wants to say, this is how I express my femininity or my masculinity, but even that's not a gender. That's an aspect of your personality. And personality, by the way, is a word we need to bring back in a hurry. So that's the other side of this watch your mouth coin, is there's the don't say their words, but say our words, like individuality, individual. Say the word personality, please. Say the word, human nature. The words human nature. Bring that back. Remind people this was a thing. And so I just don't like all the gender terms. I certainly won't use the term TERF. I won't use the term, I don't go all the way to the other side and, use terms like tranny or something horrible. Like, that's just rude. I mean, I just don't use those words, but, transsexual, trans adult, there's no such thing as a trans kid, so don't say it. Even if you want to say, well, trans kids are abused, or trans kids are, confused or whatever. They're not trans kids. Don't use the term. You keep using it, it becomes entrenched that it's a thing, and you just oppose trans kids. When it comes to the books that are in school, we've been calling them porn. They are, most of them, but understand that on the woke side, there is a solid push to make porn accessible to children, that children have their own rights and they should be able to look at porn, that they should be porn literate. So calling it porn isn't really going to help you. They've co-opted the word. So you have to do something they're not going to want to use. You have to watch what you say, that they just go, yeah, so what? So what if it's porn? But now say it's age inappropriate. Age inappropriate. That's what it actually is. Potentially traumatizing. How about that? They seem to understand the word trauma. Trauma is another one of the words you should not use in their ways. But why are we not saying age inappropriate? Why are we saying porn? I'm guilty. I'm as guilty as the next person. I've done it in videos. I've done it. But after listening to Naomi talk, I'm like, wow, I'm getting sucked into it too. All they have to do is say, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with porn? We haven't stated in our language what's wrong with it. You think, well, porn, isn't self-evident that kids shouldn't be looking at porn? Apparently not. Age inappropriate, it's kind of hard to dispute, though. That's the literal definition of what it means. And that could be a lot of things. It could be violence, graphic gore. It doesn't have to be sex. So, when you use words, especially when describing what woke are doing, even words like grooming. Grooming, I think, is pretty solid. In other words, the only thing they can do to get out of it is to deny that they're doing it, and that means they're gaslighting. So that one is not an issue. I mean, they'll demonize you for it, but it's a literal word referring to a literal term. Just don't use things like trusted adult. Don't say trusted adult. There are parents, and there are people the parents have given permission to deal with their children. That's it. There's no such thing as a trusted adult as a category that someone else gets to define other than you. And that's the problem with these words, is every time you use them, you are implying that there's a definition hanging out there like social of what a trusted adult is that you don't get to define. Right now, the school's trying to do it. They're trying to define it. So that's what I was getting at with watch your words. Watch how you use them, which words you're using, why you're using them, and only use words that they use if it's a word that is the only one we've got and it has a real meaning. Take it back. Take it back. Take back the word toxic. Take back the word trauma. Take back the words that they've taken from us and use them correctly. Don't ever use them their way. Don't ever use them their way. Don't use terms like generational trauma their way. Don't do it. Best be talking about something very clear like, you know, the Holocaust and their first generation survivors probably have some generational trauma. Mm-hmm. People whose grandparents or great grandparents lived in, you know, slavery or suffered under Jim Crow, maybe if they can literally themselves trace it back, maybe have some generational trauma. But all Black people, that's a tougher one. It's easier to actually say all Jewish people because of the fact that the entire, like every Jew on the planet was targeted. But even that, I would say caution. I don't personally get to say I have generational trauma because of the Holocaust. It's a bit much. I have concerns, but I don't get to say I have generational trauma because no one in my immediate family that I knew or knew of died in the Holocaust. They left during the pogroms. So I guess at most you could say I have generational trauma from the pogroms, but even that, I personally never suffered. So don't use terms like that. When you use mental health terms, be very careful. Think about why you're using them. So in other words, are you at your doctor's office and are they asking you if you have any diagnoses or are taking any medications? Perfectly appropriate. If you are writing your bio for social media and putting in that you are, you know, have borderline personality disorder or you have this or that, nope. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. If that's, you know, like that's a woke thing to do because now you're saying it's part of who you are. It's your identity. You're buying into that concept as opposed to this is a diagnosis I have that presumably I'm trying to treat or get better from. We don't put our illnesses, diseases, foibles, flaws, character flaws, etc., out there for all the world to see. And when you do, you're playing in their sandbox. Even if it feels like, well, I'll fit in better, or my boss says I have to put my pronouns at the bottom of my signature. Don't live not by lies. Don't do it. Say, I'm gonna pass. They say, no, you have to. Like, I don't think so. No, I don't. Every time you give in to one of these language bullies, you are entrenching the ideas behind the language. So watch your words and don't use woke vocabulary as part of yours. That's all I've got for you today. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will try to get this recording up as soon as possible for those who were unable to watch live to watch on the replay. Thanks to everyone who's watching regardless.